Week 8 fantasy football streamers, streaming defensive options for you to use in your fantasy league to get that edge that you need to win. Finding edges in fantasy football is becoming more and more difficult every single season, but one of the consistent edges is streaming defenses. Now, if you've got a big time defense, if you've got, the Baltimore Ravens this week going up against the Cleveland Browns, Detroit against Tennessee, Denver Broncos against Carolina. I mean, there's a few, and I would say the Pittsburgh Steelers against the New York Giants. Then this video isn't for you. Go ahead and turn it off and come back next week. But unless you have a set it and forget it defense or a defense in like a very obvious matchup, then it's important for you to kind of dive in and stream. Streaming defenses can give you an edge. It can give you potentially that 5 to 10 extra points that you need to get by in your matchup. So for me, I was dropping these videos earlier in the year, and we want to start getting back to it on a weekly basis. But we had some hits. There was a number of weeks where we were able to identify defenses that were available in at least 40% of leagues or more that could give us very solid results. And some of the defenses we talk about would be available to you in even more leagues than that. And why do I use a 50%, 40% threshold as opposed to my waiver wire column where I'm trying to dive super deep and give you those players available in 70, 80, 90% of leagues? Because with defenses, fantasy managers don't usually stash 2 defenses. They usually only stash 1. So that's sort of going to be what we're looking at in this video. So for me, the number 1 defense for you to go ahead and stash, you can stream. We're going to stream them if a couple things go our way, but it's the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears are a top-notch defense. Now, the Bears have a difficult matchup this week on paper against Washington, but if Jaden Daniels sits, which I believe he will, and Marcus Mariota starts, then I'm comfortable using Chicago in this matchup. Chicago is a defense that we want to have on our rosters any way you cut it. So I do think that there's an edge in you picking up Chicago. Even if Daniels plays, don't use them and just keep them around for the rest of the season. Set it and forget it if you're worried about the matchup. Now, using Chicago even versus Daniels is a little bit of a risk because Jaden Daniels can take over a football game, but all of the metrics sort of go in Chicago's direction. Chicago has the 3rd most forced turnovers this season in the NFL. They have forced multiple turnovers, 13 turnovers, which is 3rd most. They trail only Green Bay and Minnesota in terms of forced turnovers. And in terms of sacks, they're giving you sack production on a weekly basis. Chicago is averaging 3 sacks per game. That's a high mark. So Washington on paper, a very difficult opponent. But if it's Marcus Mariota, we're rolling with the Chicago Bears, and we're fine doing it. The next defense to roll out with, and this defense is going to be available to you in 45% of leagues, is the Houston Texans. And the Houston Texans, this is a team where Indianapolis has had issues. Anthony Richardson is just not getting it done this year. Not like we had anticipated. I don't think the door is shut for him, but I do think that this is going to be a very difficult matchup for Indianapolis. It's on the road in Houston. Houston is obviously coming off of a tight loss to Green Bay, where the defense didn't play that poorly, but they still lost the game. But this is a game where I think Indianapolis is gonna get it going. Indianapolis is averaging 3.1 sacks per game, and they are favored. They are favored this week at home, obviously, and a pretty sizable favorite as well. Another thing we like to look at when we're trying to identify the defenses that we want to stream is team totals. And when a team has a low team total, that's a defense we want to circle and say, why is the total so low? Well, with Indianapolis is a 20-point total, which puts them in the bottom 10 projected teams scoring-wise. So they're already not projected to score a lot of points. And they're also nearly touchdown underdogs on the road in Houston. So the Houston Texans absolutely are on the streaming radar for us this week. The next defense that we want to talk about, this is a defense that we've gone to several times over this season, and that's the Green Bay Packers. And the Green Bay Packers are available to you in 46% of leagues, and they have a good matchup this week. They go up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Jacksonville has been playing better lately, but now they take a real step up in terms of competition. And this Green Bay Packers defense, they're averaging 2.9 sacks per game. And again, this Green Bay defense has forced a ton of turnovers. They've actually forced the most turnovers in the league this year. They've forced 17 turnovers. We want to use Green Bay. And Green Bay, there's going to be some matchups you don't want to use them in, but most of the time, they are a defense that we can trust. And even in difficult matchups, they sort of make up for it with the sacks. They're definitely a fun defense. Going a little bit further down the list, we want to give you one defense every single week that, let's say you're in a competitive league, let's say you're in a jam, you're looking for a defense that can sort of play over its head and produce. And for me, this week is the Miami Dolphins. They get the emotional release of getting Tua Tagovailoa back. Their offense is going to produce this week after not producing for multiple weeks. And I know there's some people saying, Theo, you're kind of wishing that, projecting it. I believe it. I believe that Tua is going to come back. I think there's going to be function from this offense. It's a must-win game for Miami. This is a team that really hasn't scored, so they put a ton of pressure on their defense week in, week out to perform. But this is really sort of an anti-Arizona Cardinals play as well. Arizona has been really, really struggling recently. They scored 13 points against Detroit. Got shut out in that one, 2013 game there. They scored 14 points against Washington. That was a game where Arizona was supposed to win, and Jaden Daniels and the Commanders put up like 40, beat them like 42-14, completely smacked them. Then the Green Bay game, Arizona got completely demolished. They scored one single touchdown in that game. And then last week they won against the Chargers, but that was a 17-15 game. So that was a low-scoring game as well. Arizona is just not playing well. There is some dysfunction on that offense. And when you combine that with Miami in a sort of must-win game, a potential chance to turn it around type game environment, I like Miami. So Miami is the one that is going to be most widely available to you. And I much prefer the first three. Chicago, again, available to you in 41% of leagues. Houston, available to you in 45% of leagues. Green Bay is going to be available to you in 46% of leagues. And then Miami would be the one for like you deep leaguers. They're going to be available in 71% of leagues. Now, every week, I like to give you one streaming option that you can stash. So we're talking about a week 9 streaming defense. And the only reason to do this is if you have the roster room and if you are in a very competitive league. If you're in a league where, like I mentioned, Chicago, Houston, Green Bay, if all three of those are available in your league, or like 2 out of the 3, then your league, you're probably going to be all right. You don't necessarily need to do this move. But if you're in a league where you're like, Theo, none of those defenses are available to me, what are you talking about, bro? My league, those guys are rostered all year long. Some people actually roster 2 defenses looking for an edge. My league is super deep. Then take a look at the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati next week will be at home against the Las Vegas Raiders. And the Raiders are a defense that we want to attack. Gardner Minshew behind center, or even with Aiden O'Connell, who's now on the IR, they have poor quarterback play, quarterbacks who are susceptible to turnovers. The Raiders have the most turnovers in the NFL right now. So the Raiders have a ton of turnovers. The Raiders are also allowing the 7th most sacks in the league. So Cincinnati is a defense that we're not usually using, but we're going to elevate them at home in a game where they should put a ton of pressure on the Las Vegas Raiders. So to recap it one more time, this week's streamers, Chicago Bears, or stash them, Chicago Bears, Houston Texans, Green Bay Packers, and then your deep league start is the Miami Dolphins at home against the Arizona Cardinals. And then next week, we are looking to stash the Cincinnati Bengals. That's a fun one right there. I'm Theo Gremminger. I'm dropping videos like this all week long at Player Profiler. My waiver wire video drops on Monday. That's also a podcast. my Sleepers, Streamers, and Stashes podcast, as well as video. That drops every single week, Friday or Saturday. And then I'm dropping podcasts all week long. I'm doing some shows with multiple analysts. Check me out. All my written work is over on Player Profile as well. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Make sure you hit that like button. And we're going to help you crush your leagues this season.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.